Welcome back, gamers. I'm Nick Cardarelli. This is Raised on D&D, and we're going to talk to some gamers about playing tabletop role-playing games with their families. Welcome back to Raised on D&D. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and my next guest is from Riverside, California. You know him best as the creator of Life of the Party, Realities of an RPGer, as well as several monster manuals for Kwood Press. He is currently working on Book 4 of Life of the Party. Please welcome the very talented Travis Hanson. Hi, Travis.
Hey, how you doing?
Real good. Thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Family loves Life of the Party, participated in every one of the Kickstarters, and they act like kids act like Christmas when they get a new book in the mail. When did you start role playing? When did you start playing Dungeons and Dragons, Travis?
I started playing back in '82. I came from the Red Book. I learned what's kind of funny, my friends talk about having the whole devil worship thing back in the '80s, but on the West Coast, I don't ever remember seeing that. In fact, we learned in a church group to play, and we didn't have those issues. Now I know I've got friends in the Midwest that you had to hide for that. We had to hide for other reasons. We had to hide because we were geeks. It had nothing to do with what kind of geek we were. It was just how it was. But then we moved from D&D. I mean, in the '80s, there was a ton of incredible gaming systems out there that were pretty awesome. A ton of different genres that you could play in. And we really got, we played a lot of Star Frontiers. Then we had Gamma Worlds, which was fantastic. And I liked Gamma Worlds more for the mutation aspect of the game. You'd roll this great character, and then you'd have to roll from a mutations deal to see what happens to you. So you could get totally screwed without even realizing it before the game started. And then we got hooked on Gangbusters.
Oh.
And that is basically, we had Top Secret too, but I didn't get into that as much as Gangbusters. Gangbusters was like Grand Theft Auto set in the 1920s before Grand Theft Auto even showed up on the scene. Yeah. And you played in this Chicago waterfront area, and you could be either the FBI or the gangsters, and it was a percentage-based game, which was kind of most of the games that we had kind of moved towards, where you just rolled two 10-sided dice. And I loved how quickly you could put a character together. There was no major amount of detail of creating a backstory and everything else. You just jumped in as either a low-level thug or your brand new FBI agent.
Now, was that because the mortality rate of characters was high? You had to be able to make up a new character to get back into it fast?
No, they just wanted you to get into the game.
Oh, okay. So it was just quick and easy character creation, so you could start playing right away.
Right. Don't get me wrong. I like D&D, but it takes an hour or so to put a good character together.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
What's the backstory? What's this? What's that? And when you're teaching an 11-year-old how to do it, it's even longer, and then you're going to teach your friends. So before you can even get into the game, you're spending all this time on character prep. Now, I like to give me 10 minutes or 15 minutes, roll some stats, create a couple of things, and then just dive right in.
Just jump into it. And that's great.
And you could build your skill levels, as you moved along. Skills would become presented to you during the game. You started off with one or two skills, but you could always grow and earn skills. And as much as I got to admit, that was the game. D&D you'd play, and we'd play at lunch and stuff like that. Gangbusters, we'd get together. This is when you could do this growing up as a kid. So you got to remember, we're 12 and 13 at the time when we were doing this.
Uh-huh.
And we would start playing in the summer. We'd start like on a Wednesday afternoon at my friend's house, and we would leave Saturday night to get home. I don't know any parent that will let their kid do that.
No, I loved those. summertime marathon gaming sessions where we would stay all weekend and play all night. And it's just incredible that, and it was wonderful time period that we were able to do those kind of things as teenagers and tweens and things like that.
Well, and we were also, we lucked out. We were in the best of both worlds, because you got to look at it. In the 80s, role playing was big for us, and then video games were coming in. So my generation was the perfect maelstrom of both video and tabletop RPG.
Yes.
And now, as great as it is, I'm really glad that there's a resurgence to it and kids want to get into it and play. But it's more of a nostalgia feel too, to a degree. It's like, oh wow, this is one of those games that's been around forever and everybody plays, or I got to get into this. Whereas when it was just fresh and new and everything else. And then the more I played, the more I got into, I would rather world build than anything else.
When did you introduce your children to tabletop role playing? How old would you say they were when you started with them?
Well, because I was doing comics and traveling quite a bit, it was really late. I'm a bad parent. They were in their late teens when I introduced them for the first time. And we did a couple of sessions. But I'm in a position right now where I had to make a decision. Do I want to be the guy that plays the game, or do I want to be the guy that makes the game?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I do is they play and I build them content. So I create maps, I create monsters, I let them, they DM now.
How old are your children now?
They're in their 20s.
Okay, and how many do you have?
5.
Wow, 5. Okay. And
I've got 2 grandkids now.
2 grandkids. Congratulations. I think I saw one of the baby pictures just recently. You just recently had a grandbaby, right?
Right. Not even a week old.
2 grandbabies, 5 children. And how many of those 5 are still gaming?
All of them.
All of them?
All
really?
my kids game. All my kids game.
Wow.
Well, except the oldest. I mean, but they play other games too. So we might not have been RPGing. We would definitely get into some of the other cool tabletops that are out there that would allow. We're very more of a strategic family as well. So there was a lot of Risk that was played. So we would always play games, but it never really mattered what game it was, because we were always out to try something new.
That is incredible. So now you provide them the content, and they're off gaming with their friends and each other and their families. Right.
I know my son got his wife into the game. My daughter was running a group. My other son, when he's up there, he games with his siblings a little bit. One of the best gaming sessions that I had as an adult was my kids when they first got into it. And like I said, it was late in their teenage years, because you can't really force kids into something. It's like, oh, that's dad's deal. And that's tough, especially when they're teens. They asked me one day, they go, hey, can you run us a D&D game? And I said, sure. So I said, here's the deal. You get your friends together, and you guys read up on the manuals and on how to put a character together. And they said, all right. So they did all that. And then they came over, and what it was 9 or 10 kids that had come over, these older, and some dressed up. And I tell you, when you play with a bunch of drama geeks, and it was like herding cats. But it was one of the best adventures I think I've done. We had a lot of fun with it. And I owned it, and it's a shame that group just couldn't sustain itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're all getting ready to go to college and stuff like that. But man, it was one of the best evenings I had ever had. 5 hours of chaos and 5 or 6 hours. It was just cool.
That is amazing. what do you feel are the lessons that you've taken away from tabletop role-playing and D&D that kind of helped you as an adult?
Well, so first of all, I look at, the RPG experience is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you can call it whatever you want, but for me, it's storytelling. You're creating the story as a group. And what that actually did, because when we moved, I moved from LA to Riverside. I lost my entire gaming groups when I was about 15. So finding another group was really, really tough where we moved to, because we were just out in the middle of the sticks. There was really nothing. And I was able to get a couple of friends into it, but it was never kind of the great romance that we had as of us in the RPG world. The one thing that we would run into that I have found is, as I started going, as I got into comics and started getting into storytelling, how much RPGing helps me in my career as a storyteller. And that's the exciting part, is because it would allow me to just create. I could go into a story and I could come up with these complex scenarios, and I could come up with these complex situations, or how people dealt with each other. I mean, it's awesome. And then you throw in a couple of years of theater into that, and then it allowed me to really just dig into some good fantasy stories as a creator. And, it wasn't until much later that I got back into my love of the game, almost like 4 or 5 years ago. Just because I do a lot of children's books. I do a lot of regular art. I do a lot of game art for other companies, several board games. I finished a game called Texas Hold'em with Zombies. I did one called Santa's Bag. We did one called No Mercy, which is the game of war, with a twist. And, I did all these other games, and I thought, how much did role-playing help me? Quite a bit, because it showed me a couple of things too in life. It showed me what I liked in games, and it showed me what I didn't like in games.
You said that you came back to gaming about 5 years ago. What was the catalyst for that?
Just kind of nostalgia. I had some good friends that I talked to quite a bit, and they were telling me all about, what was going on. And I thought, I'd really like to get back into this. I have been out of it for a long time. And I was still doing gaming art, a lot of fantasy art. And I had just, one of my first clients, and a lot of it was when I stopped being an art director for a big firm and went on my own. One of my first clients was, I got back into the fantasy realm. I did, what was it? Gygax magazine. I was in several of their issues as one of their artists. And then I did a manual. I've done a lot of folio manuals, which is a D&D 5th edition extra. Mm-hmm. And then I got contacted by the guys that were doing Earth Dawn, and I started doing Earth Dawn. They redid their manuals. And then I realized, it has been so long since I got to play like I used to play, and I still don't get to play like I want to play. So I kind of worked myself back into it.
What sparked Life of the Party for you?
Life of the Party was frustration.
Okay.
No, I had a friend that was doing these cutesy little strips that he couldn't sell because he was using properties that he didn't own. And I would get super frustrated with him. It's like he'd get 50,000 hits and likes, and people would just ooh, that's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't even use them, and I'm trying to do this fantasy comic that's based off of, an RPG game that we had played years ago, that I've just converted into my own realm. And it was a long format comic, and I'm only getting 10 likes, 15 likes. So I'm like, this sucks. And I had just gotten out of a bad contract with a game company that had gone south. I was frustrated, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to just draw a comic of what I like, which I love fantasy, not just gaming fantasy. I love fantasy in general. Mm-hmm. So I drew this elf, and I drew almost a beholder, because you can't draw a pure beholder.
Yes.
And I drew this fighter yelling at each other, and they talked about rolling a 1. because he hit it, but he rolled a 1.
Well, one of my favorite of your strips where the arrow is sticking out of the angry beholder's face, and
now that's the very first one.
And they're yelling at each other. He's like, "Well, I hit it." He's like, "You rolled a 1." Hilarious. Just that.
So
bringing that the dynamic of players yelling at each other at a table into the fantasy realm. It was wonderful.
And so what happened so I post that, not thinking anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
And within 4 hours, it had 6,000 shares.
Wow. So it just went viral.
So I thought, you know what? I'll just throw another one up and just see what happens. So I did one the next day. I had to go up the next day. And same thing. Not as big, but enough to go, okay. And then I did another one. And then I did another one. And all of a sudden, I'm doing it daily.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't stop. So now I want to do more with it, but I made some ground rules when I got going. I mean, after about 3 months. Now I was never looking to publish it. I was never looking to do anything. And then all of a sudden people were going like, can we have this in a book? Can we have this in a book? Because the internet's great, but no one wants to read the internet. Does that make sense?
Right.
People still want books.
Yes.
And the problem I ran into Bean is I had like 750 strips of this long format story that no one wants to read because that's an investment. Life of the Party is just a snippet of life in one scene. It's easier to share and invite people to be a part of. But at the same time, it allowed me to do something else with my humor, with play in other worlds that I normally couldn't have played in, and to play in the RPG world as well. And most people think that, it's D&D or it's Pathfinder. Actually, it's a version of about everything.
Your comic tips its hat to all kinds of fantasy, from literature and gaming as well.
And that's important, because if you only did a D&D comic, you run out of ideas rather quickly.
Yes. I have too many favorites to mention in our podcast, but like I said, whenever we would unbox a book from the Kickstarter, the kids loved it. And the coloring books, they love the coloring books from the Kickstarters. Getting to color their own, and my boys would even make up their own jokes, and some of their jokes were from our game sessions, and they would put on the comic.
That's the best thing is I wanted to do it in a way that within the comic there's a lot of life in there, because when we played at the tabletop, we talk about everything too. Nothing, you always talked about everything. And the other thing about RPG, and I don't care what anybody says, people let their hair down in an RPG game.
Yes.
And the worst comes out in people, and the best comes out in people.
Definitely.
And you can't control always, there's a reason why you have chaotic evil and lawful good. And it's to create conflict within the game. And some people freak out. And they're like, well, we're not going to have any evil characters or anything else. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but aren't you going out killing evil characters? And, and if someone wants to play evil, let them play evil, because it teaches you how to deal with real people in life. You can't live in a bubble. And if you create your game in a bubble, then the game, it's fun, but also you need a little bit of that chaos in there. But it all depends on who's playing too. You have those that are very serious, and then you have those that are not serious, that just enjoy the flow of the game, make it fun, make it quick. It's escaping. It's pure escapism, and if you treat it that way, you'll have a really good experience, even though it does get frustrating at times. There's one gag in Life of the Party. Well, there's several gags that are from my own games as growing up as a teen, as well, is where they're showing the scars and the wounds. And the one guy says, yeah, this is from dragging, and this is from this. The other dude's showing his arm, and he goes, it's a pencil stab from an angry GM. That's based on a true story, because we were playing Gangbusters, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, and we were on a 2, maybe 3-day bender of games. So we were tired. We're teens, a bunch of, male adolescents. So you've got all these, extra bravado, that builds up. And I said something, and the next thing I know, I had a pencil sticking out of my leg, and it broke off. So I had the lead in my leg. I had, when I went home, my mom was so mad, and I had to go home, and we had to go to the doctor to have them pull the lead out, and it turned blue for a while in that area. But yet,
wow.
Even though I was frustrated at the moment, it was still one of those, I laughed because that's how I look at life. And it goes with my philosophy. I can't control the circumstances of my life, but I can control the reaction. And if I look at, like something like, well, how do I make this fun, or how do I make this laughable, or how do I make this realistic? So I decided that as I started to do Life of the Party, you would never, ever see the player, ever. You only see their avatars. And the other thing that we did was they're never named.
Yes.
And I never wanted.
At first, my family was like, well, what's the fighter's name, and what's his wife's name, and those kind of things. But the fact that they're not named is great, because it allows people to put themselves. We'll be sitting around reading the latest Life of the Party comic, and people will be like, oh, that's like your ranger, or that's like your cleric, that's something you would do. And so it allows people to, I think it allows people to put themselves, their own characters, their own game experiences into the comic with what you're presenting. And I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, because people relate to your class more than they relate to your character name. And the minute I name them, all of a sudden I've alienated people.
Yes. And
that's not what I wanted to do. Because to me, and I'll be perfectly honest, everybody's been a jerk in a game before.
Guilty.
And I don't, and the whole holier than thou attitude that I see in some of the gaming forums bothers me, because it's like, well, wait a second, you're a person, and if you're getting frustrated over a strip, then obviously it's hitting a nerve that you've done.
Yes.
Guilty party, and I'm guilty of it. I've been a jerk before, and people have been a jerk to me. And it doesn't always, it never makes it, retaliation never makes it right, but that's what happens. It's just part of the game. And, as we talk about gaming and such, I remember a Risk game. There was a broken treaty in the middle of this Risk game, and one individual did not talk to the rest of the family for like 3 years because they were just angry.
Yeah, Risk will definitely break relationships quick.
I've also noticed that gaming does that. RPGs will do it too if you're not careful. But I think that if you use them, I think they're great, and they're great tools for helping with social interaction. I love the resurgence. My wife doesn't play at all, which is okay. We're busy. She's working on her master's. Or bachelor's. We've got 5 kids. We both have full-time, I draw full-time. She works full-time as a librarian in a high school. Even though that she doesn't play, she and her high school has set up in her high school a whole D&D club.
Wow.
Creates a safe, she creates a safe spot for these kids in their library to play D&D.
Wow.
And it's nice that I can give her resources for these kids. So they'll get maps occasionally, or they'll get things that they, here's some monsters that you can build for your thing or whatever, and such. So she's, just because someone doesn't play doesn't mean they can't help get the game out further or get people involved in it.
That's right. Your children kind of approached you about gaming. You said they were older, and they said, "Hey, will you run this for us? We want to try it." And but there was but there was groundwork before that, right? Because you were always a fan of fantasy and things like that.
So, my world is quite unique. Drawing comics and conventions and stuff like that. I've involved my family very much in our business as an artist. My one son, who's 23 now, yeah, 20, somewhere in there. He's been doing conventions since he was 14, running them for me. All my kids, even my 11-year-old, can help run a show. They've been in that environment of gaming, but they've had the advantage of seeing it from the other side, which is different than the fan that plays.
Mm-hmm.
Working with the creators of these games, or meeting the other artists that draw, like Mark Poole, and they've met Larry Elmore, and seen the interaction that I've had with these great artists and creators. Richard Witters is another one who's he's the lead artist for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for Wizards. They get to see that it's a business as well, mm-hmm. that it's enjoyment, but that there's also, you can make a living doing this. So they've had two different viewpoints of how the creative world works, from a fan's point of view and from a creator's point of view, and how they can intermingle. Wow. So they've been introduced to fantasy and gaming and all these different walks of life because of the shows, because of the conventions. I don't think it had anything to do with here, because I don't know how many kids you have, but having 5 kids and 4 of them pretty close together and all in high school and all doing different things, no one really pays attention to what dad's doing. They just know dad draws. But the shows allowed them to see what the world was really like in the fantasy and the RPG and the comics and everything else. I mean, it's I hate looking at it and dividing, going, mm-hmm. okay, this is the game group and the comic group and the science fiction group and the fantasy group and all that. I think it's all one group. Yes. It's just one. We all enjoy, we all are passionate. We might about the whole genre in total, but we also have our little niches that we become passionate about. Like, if you noticed, all my elves are 4-fingered. Well, you can thank Richard and Wendy Penny for that.
Yeah. I did notice that, being a big ElfQuest fan myself, that the elves were 4-fingered. I was like, oh, and that's that was one of those little. I felt like it was, obviously it was your preference, but I felt like it was another nod, another hat tip to that wonderful universe of fantasy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much good stuff out there. Why sit there and go, this is better than that, when in reality they all have something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Even Game of Thrones, I make fun of that. I got a great comic I want to put together. I just don't know how to do it yet, because I'll probably I don't want to say it's a mean blow, but it's a great way to how to finish the story. And it deals with George R. Martin and Robert Jordan. So I just haven't figured out how to make that comic work.
Your kids now grown and off at college and making families of their own. What kind of values and lessons do you think they pulled from those early experiences with the creativity of gaming with you?
Well, so the cons and such, and what lessons did they learn? And you look at it as they come. When you're at a gaming convention or a comic book convention and you sit behind the table, you will meet people from every walk of life. You'll meet people on the left, on the right, gay, straight, whatever. You meet everybody. And you meet people that disagree with your values or viewpoints or whatever. And you meet people that agree with them. And yet at the same time, as everybody comes to your table, you begin to realize that we're all human. Mm-hmm. And there are many times that I've laughed and I've joked and I've cried hearing people's stories and finding a common connection, even though we're on two different sets of the spectrum. And I think it allowed my kids to learn to look at the interior of a person and not the exterior. And I think that's what was one of the great benefits of being so intermingled with the industry, or, you know, and the people out there and the fans, you know, and seeing all these great hearts, because deep down, you know, whether you're an atheist or whether you're a monotheist or whatever, we all go back to that one same beginning. So we're all kind of related regardless. Mm-hmm. We're just one big family that just has issues. And I haven't met a family that has never had issues. But it's helped my kids, I think, really look at going that life's not always black and white, but full of gray. And I think gaming teaches us that too. Mm-hmm. You know, as you play Dungeons and Dragons, and as I play D&D, you know, I like chaotic neutral. That's my favorite character. I used to be just neutral. And then I found myself leaning towards lawful at times, but then I found chaotic neutral to be best because I like a little chaos. But I also learned that how do you interact with people when you're playing games? And if you're a chaotic character and you're playing against or with a lawful character, how do you guys find common ground? Mm-hmm. And you don't always find common ground, and that's okay. But it teaches them how to interact. And I think my kids have learned, you know, or are learning that you can't just go in and browbeat someone down, but you can go in and go, well, how do I, you know, charisma? How do I work my charisma a little better? How do I, you know, use your intelligence and your wisdom over your strength, and such. So I definitely see that there has been some growth. Some of the negative things is, and this is just from all the gaming that we've done in certain points, is competitiveness. I gotta win. You know, someone's gonna come away crying, and it's not like they intentionally do it. I mean, I can remember playing a game of Nerds with my mom. It's a card game, and having her swear, and my mom never swears, and I got her to swear in this game, and but you know. And that's where I say it's just what comes out of you in the middle of a game. You start to learn more about yourself. And you start to have good interaction with people. And then you also start to realize that maybe it's not always about winning the game. It's about the relationship that you have with those people at the moment. Right now, it's just, you know, Sophie and I are here together, and we play Kings of Tokyo, a monster game. And I'll be honest, I can't beat her. I'm consigned to my fate. I know I'm going to lose, but I like playing with her. We just, you know, we Sushi Go-Go. I don't know if you've ever played that. That's a fun game as a family.
Yeah.
But RPGs, I think there's a time and a place. But I think that there's benefits from other types of games too. So not only do I like to create RPG games, I like creating regular games as well.
What do you got in the near future?
Yeah, I've got to finish a couple things for this Kickstarter with Life of the Party. I'm starting to do all the putting people's characters within the comic, which I enjoy doing. I like dropping people's characters within the comic. Once that's done, and the rest, you know, and then I'll start original artwork for it. Then I'll start looking at running book 4 for Life of the Party, which I liked running in January or February, but I think I'm going to hold this one till March. And kick that one in March. So Life of the Party 4. Now, I want to do it a little different. I want to do it kind of Farside-ish style. So the book's going to be bigger lengthwise, not width.
Okay.
So we'll have 2 comics on top of each other, so I can get more comics in there. That's my goal. The next other project that I want to do a little bit with Life of the Party, and I've been thinking, you know, well, what is the next step for it? And don't get me wrong, I like doing the single panel, but I think there's so much more that you could do with Life of the Party. And the cool thing about Life of the Party is the campaigns are always changing. You never know. I mean, you can kill characters all the time. Thank goodness, because you got resurrection spells. They just keep coming back. And
some of the best strips are when the rogue gets caught in the trap, or when the rogue doesn't disarm the trap and somebody gets caught in the trap. And when you flip that page, or you click on the latest strip, and there's the rogue crushed under a boulder or something, and then they're arguing over about taking his stuff, or are we going to waste the healing spells, that kind of thing. And we just roar laughing. And so it's great, because then the next one he's back. It's not a permanent, oh no, that we'll never see that guy again.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes it fun. And now I'm just thinking, well, can I convert Life of the Party into a 3 or 4 panel strip?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can. I just want to do it in a way. Now, if I do it that way, the strip will change a little bit. It'll become more Bloom County-ish,
mm-hmm.
With that RPG flair.
Okay.
How do we make it different? And that's a hard thing to do. But the nice thing is we're seeing more of it. There's a lot more RPG cartoonists coming out of the woodworks, which is great, because it's just showing that our fantasy world, our industry, is becoming more accepted.
I would argue that RPGs are more mainstream now than maybe ever in the past.
Oh, easily. And the other thing is, with, I think, Life of the Party, that I wanted it to be different. A lot of times people make fun of that's why I don't like the Big Bang Theory. Mm-hmm. They make fun of the geek. And I struggle with that, because it's like, wait a second, you don't fully understand. It's like when you watch an episode that has a convention in it, a comic book convention, and you go, that's so wrong. They don't even know what they're talking about. There was an episode of Bones where they had an auction that was going for $500,000. And I've probably been to 400 or 500 conventions in the last 15, 16 years or whatever. And I'm like, wait a second, I've never, ever seen an auction like that, or at all. It's just sloppy writing. But at the same time, when I was working on Life of the Party, my goal was never to make fun of the player. I never want to make fun of the player. I will make fun of the character, because I think that people don't think sometimes when they do stuff in the game.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories, especially about gaming with your family, because our listeners are now not only parents with young children, like elementary school age children that they're introducing to gaming, but they also have teenagers that the parents, some of them don't even have any experience with RPGs themselves, and because their teens are wanting to get into it, they're learning the game so they can run games for them at home and those kind of things. So it's the whole spectrum of people who are now excited about role-playing games and D&D.
And I will say this, one of my biggest regrets is I didn't start. We played a lot of games, but I didn't start the RPGs when they were little. But a lot of it was I lived in a bubble. It was my own. I created my own walls that I had to break down so that I could do it again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have these families, and I get it. Parents are busy, and parents have a lot going on. But the thing is if I could tell something to a parent, with my first 4, I worked so much, I missed a lot of them growing up. With my 11-year-old, I kind of got a second chance, and I don't want to waste it. And what better way? We had so much fun putting her character together the other night, and she's on pins and needles now when she can play with her sister. So, if I could tell a parent, learn. And if it's not, it doesn't have to be D&D. There's a lot of RPGs out there that are a little bit more simpler than D&D.
Yeah, and now there's lots of games that are actually directed towards elementary age children and things like that weren't available when we were younger.
Right.
I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. We're so excited to see the next Life of the Party, and looking forward to the Kickstarter in the spring. But thank you again. You have a great day.
Anytime, my friend, anytime.
Thanks for listening to this month's Raised on D&D, the podcast about family and gaming. Be sure to like our page at www.facebook.com/RaisedOnDND podcast, where you can find exclusive content, transcripts of the episode, and links to the resources that we discussed. As always, happy gaming.